We are sitting here with Norman Lloyd. It's Monday, October 20th, around 11 o'clock at the Villa Aurora in Pacific Palisades. And Norman Lloyd is a distinguished actor, director, producer in film and TV. You've been in show business for 75 years, if I understand that right.
1932 is 76 years.
Okay. Wow.
I started with Eva Le Gallienne in the Pacific Repertory Theatre as an apprentice in 1932. There was a theatre in New York called the Civic Repertory Theatre on 14th Street and 6th Avenue in a wonderful old 19th century theatre that Modjeska had played in, Booth had played in, and it still remained as it had been in the 19th century. It had poles that you had to look around if you sat in the orchestra, and the balcony were like pews. They weren't individual seats. They were like rounded benches all attached. And that was the theatre, and it remains in my mind to this day the finest classical repertory theatre we've ever had in this country.
You did, I just want to make a short background. You worked in theater for a very long time in New York, different theaters.
Yes.
You worked on major films. You produced and directed Alfred Hitchcock Presents for 8 years. If I understand it right, you came to Hollywood in '41 for your work on Saboteur, or was it in '41? When did you come to Hollywood?
Well, there was a fault stop. In 1939, I came to Hollywood with Orson Welles, with whom I had been in the theatre at the Mercury Theatre in New York, where we had done Julius Caesar and Shoemaker's Holiday. That was Orson's, one of his most famous productions, his production of Julius Caesar, which he did in modern dress, anti-Mussolini. Mussolini was still in power at that time, and he did it as an anti-Italian fascist piece. And made it appear to be as if it were a melodrama written the night before. It was the most amazing political play. In '39, he was brought out to Hollywood to do what he wanted to do, which was The Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad. And he brought his company out with him. He at that time merged the theater company, which I was in, with the radio company, which was other actors whom he merged together. He was going to put us all in this production of The Heart of Darkness. The studio, even though there was a script, and we had a reading at one point, one reading, the studio said they didn't want to do it. For whatever reason, I don't know. But that was it. That was 1939. Orson asked us to stay, but I had a wife, and she was pregnant at the time. I couldn't stay with just my good looks. I needed a job. So I came back to New York. And therefore I was not in Citizen Kane, although I lucked out, because it was in '41, which was about the time he made Citizen Kane, 42, 41 or 2, that Hitchcock gave me the title role in Saboteur. And so I think there was an overlap there in the shooting, and I was able to do Saboteur, which worked out better.
I just saw it yesterday night again, so it's good.
So in '42, I came out. I went back to New York after I did Saboteur, and then I came out again in 1944, where I then stayed 8 years, during which time I met this wonderful group of people about whom we're going to talk.
Right.
And I was here for 8 years. at that time and did a number of pictures. And during that time, through the way I got into being a witness to this wonderful group, was twofold. Through someone who knew Hans Eisler, I think. Now, Hans then lived on the beach in Malibu, in a little cottage, just a cottage, not one of the big houses at all. An agent had owned it before Hans, and it had a bar, of course, and written in the bar were all the people who used to come and visit him. It was quite a Hollywood group. And Joe Losey's wife at that time, soon to be disposed of, she knew we were looking for a place to live, my wife and I, and there was a house right next to Hans's on the beach in Malibu. She recommended it. I had coincidentally at that time signed a contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer as an actor. So I felt very flush. I was going to be very rich, you see. So my wife and I decided to take this house in the colony on the beach. It was a big house. It had been lived in by Norman Lloyd and her husband, Jean Markey. But the house had originally been lived in by two silent film people, Lillian Tashman and Edmund Lowe. The reason I tell you this is it was right next to Hans's, and it was large. It was a house that as you went in, you opened the door, you stepped in, you were at the bar. I mean, your hand was still in the air from opening the door, and you could have a drink. They don't make pictures like they used to. And so we took it, not because of the bar, but we thought it was very grandiose and fun and all that. Now, the reason I say it was very large is that on occasion, Hans Eisler, whom we adored and loved, it was just one of the most marvelous people I've ever known in my life. He and his wife Lou used to give parties, most distinguished people, particularly of the circle that we're dealing with. And sometimes they invited too many people for their little cottage. So Lou would say, may we use your living room? And we would say, by all means, and then we assumed we were welcome. That's how we got to those parties. But we adore them, and even when he had little parties, with the most distinguished people, the conversations, which they were in English.
Okay.
I remember once they were discussing a book of Kafka's, and they felt stymied by English, and they turned to me and said, do you mind if we speak German for a little bit? So then the conversation flowed.
But it were mainly German-speaking people, the guests?
Yes, as I recall, yeah.
Can you remember?
Well, the French people who would be part of it would be, again, the man with whom I was very close and whom I loved, and the memory of whom is very moving, is Jean Renoir. And he was there all the time. And he was the only Frenchman, I think. The rest, even the Hollywood people like Paul Henry were German. You did have Artie Shaw, who was a very popular jazz musician, who was then married to Ava Gardner. so we had some beauty. But they were all German, yes.
Not many Americans?
Hmm?
Not many Americans besides you and your wife?
No. Now, when you would get up to Chaplin's, the mixture would be different. But I'm talking about at Hans's or at Sauka's. She would also have Christopher Isherwood, who lived in back of her house. And she would have some picture people. But like Florence Amoka and so on. But no, it was just predominantly the Germans.
And you said the way you met the German exile community was trifold. So this was the one way you met them, with Hans Eisler living next to you?
Yes, primarily it was twofold. Primarily with Hans. That is to say, we had the house next door. Now, I had done a play in New York with Hans before.
Oh. What was the name of it?
It was called Medicine Show. And Dorothy McGuire and I had played the leads in this play. What happened was, the play didn't run very long, ran about 4 weeks. But I got to know Hans. And I remember I used to do a song and dance in it to music that Hans wrote. And the conductor was Joscha Hornstein. You know the name? And he exhibited as much patience as he could with me until finally he said, well, you know, I was singing and dancing. Every note wrong, every step out of rhythm, whatever. And finally the singing was what was really killing Yasha, my singing. And finally he stopped and he said, every note must be like iron. And so I called him Yasha, every note must be like Iron Horenstein, because I tried. Maybe the show would have run longer if I'd succeeded. Anyway, so I knew Hans, you see. And so when we took this house right next door to him, it was a reacquaintance, so to speak, with someone. When I'd done the play, I didn't, strangely enough, get to know him so well. But once we moved next door, it was wonderful. And you know, one day Hans loved to drink sherry with eating salami. And he drank a lot of sherry and ate a lot of salami. And one day it overtook him. And he collapsed on the kitchen floor. And Lou came in running. Hans has collapsed, Hans has collapsed. So we ran in and there he was on the floor writhing. I said, Hans, I asked a stupid question. Are you all right? All right. He said, oh, no. He said, I feel as if 1,000 frogs are copulating on my tongue. Now, how can you not love a guy like that? I mean, he was always saying, now is the time to do our ballet rheumatique. Rheumatique, because everyone was beginning to get aches, you see. He says, now we do our ballet rheumatique. And he wanted to, I don't know why he started to involve Stravinsky's name in this. He had this wonderful imagination. And of course, my wife's favorite line of Hans is he would sit on the, I don't know, front porch or whatever it was of his little cottage and look out the ocean and say, nature is boring. Looking at the Pacific Ocean. It's boring. How can you not love him?
Yeah.
I mean,
You
he was
had-
beautiful.
As I understand right, you had the chance to work with him here at the Coronet Theatre.
Ah, yes.
Is this-
Well, at one point, you see, having come from the theater and doing movies, I did a play out here about Pony, and then got involved in movies. And I yearned for the theater. And my friend, a dear, dear friend, who used to attend these gatherings once in a while, was John Houseman. Wonderful man. And he was Orson Welles' partner at the Mercury. And the best work Orson ever did in his life was when John was his partner. That broke up. But until it broke up. And one day, a lawyer friend introduced me to another lawyer who said he could get a lease on a theater that was being built. And that was the Coronet on La Cienega. It's still there. But it was still being built. They were putting in the seats and the floor and the stage and so on. So this lawyer said to me, I'll go half if you can raise the other half. And I did. I went to Houseman, who in the course of his lifetime had 7 different theater companies, one of which was the Mercury Theater, and another of which is still 35 years after it was founded. And I don't know how long Houseman's been dead now, 15 years maybe. A company still running and touring the United States called the Actors Theater. That's 2, but he founded 7 theater companies. And this was one called Pelican Productions. And we took the Coronet Theater. Now, one of the reasons is that Hans Eisler had shown me this play of Brecht's called Galileo. And I thought, my goodness, this play is one of the great plays of our time. And Hans told me, but no one wants to do it. It had been turned down by Orson Welles. As a matter of fact, there's a whole correspondence with Eisler and Welles about the play. It had been turned down by Mike Todd, whose way of dismissing it was, well, if I was had a company called the Vilna Players, maybe they'd do it. Why he selected Vilna, I will not know to this day. And then Harold Kazan turned it down. Harold Kloman turned it down. There were all these people who turned it down. So Hans told me all this. I began to figure out why. Because the play is a political play, and this was the beginning of McCarthy's time. And so it meant if you did it, you were taking a big chance, which was okay. The play overrode any other consideration. Now, it so happens that involved with this play was Charles Lawton, because he had been working with Brecht on the translation for 2 years. And Charles, despite the warnings of his wife, who kept saying, oh, you're in with all those reds, you're going to get it, you're going to get it. Of course, she was a funny little person. I liked Elsa, but she was really a character. She'd come to our house and have dinner and sort of press the silverware down and even bend it. Say, where did you get this? But she was wonderful. I loved her. Anyway, she said Charles would ruin his life doing this politically. But in his way, I mean, the only way, it didn't matter. He wanted to play this part and do this play. And he worked very hard with Brett, and it contributed enormously to the translation. It was only the two of them. So when Hans gave me the play, and I had a meeting with Brecht, and said, yeah, we'd like to, well, and I showed it to Houseman, who said, oh, yes. Then we decided we would do this play. But in order to play it safe, we did it as a second play. We didn't open with it. We opened with the first production outside of New York ever of Skin of Our Teeth of Thornton Wilder. And then we did Galileo. And it was a smash here. You couldn't get a seat. We couldn't extend the run because we had other commitments coming into the theater. And the play then went to New York, where Brooks Atkinson killed it. And then 30 years later gave it a great review when there was a revival in New York. However, so Hans did the music to this production. And it's interesting to note, the play ran for 4 weeks, that Stravinsky, who was living here at the time, came many times to the production because he thought the music was the best theater music he had ever heard. I don't know about ever, but
Yeah.
he was fascinated by Hans's music, which is wonderful music, marvelous music. And actually, Hans was in a great period of composing, because then those Hollywood songs came later. They are for all time. They are incredible. So I then also, I was working for Milestone at the time as his associate, and I said to Milestone, you know, we were doing a picture called Arch of Triumph with Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer, which was about the plight of the refugee in Paris. And we were having trouble with the script. And I said to Milestone one day, look, we have the definitive refugee here in Brecht. I said, we should put him on to rewrite. And we did. We did a couple of things. First of all, we told him that we wanted him to rewrite certain scenes, certain areas. And then he said very creatively, well, first you have to run everything you've shot. I want to see everything you've shot, and then I will tell you what I think should be done. We did that. And there was a sequence in it where Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer go down to Eden Rock. They're refugees, but they go to the south of France and have a great time on the beach as if it was Malibu. And she was in what we used to call in those days a bathing suit. And Brecht looked at this and he said, well, the first thing that has to go is that scene on the beach in the south of France because no one will believe they're refugees romping around the beach. He was right. Ingrid Bergman would not hear of it. She wanted that sequence, and she had the power. So it stayed. Then he wrote several scenes based on his experience. You know, the Nazis, when they got after him, he got to Denmark. And when they came into Denmark, he just got out by the skin of his teeth. He got on a boat out to sea and got to Finland. He dramatized those things, and he also dramatized another scene where Boyer gives up his ticket in order to a refugee, in order to get money, gives it up for money, in order to get a room to kill the Charles Lawton character, Hake. Well, he wrote several scenes, all of which were rejected by the studio. Every one of them. I was mortified. I was so embarrassed. And I'm in it one night, it's close to midnight, and we're working on this stuff with Milestone, whom I loved, but had a trigger temper, terrible temper, which cost him a lot in his career. Many times his temper cost him jobs. This night, we're shooting, but it's close to midnight. We're trying to get some script out of this. And Milestone begins to object to what Brecht has written. I defend the material. Brecht, seeing me defend it, takes the cue, and he defends it. We argue with Milestone, who loses his temper at one point while Brecht is explaining what he thinks the scene should be, and Milestone says, "You're an idiot!" to Brecht. I am outraged. And I say, "How dare you call this man an idiot?" And Milestone turns to me and says, "And you're an idiot too!" This is creating in Hollywood.
Wow. How did Brecht react to this? What?
Impassive. Nothing. Marvelous. So that was the end of the evening's work. Now, I used to drive Brecht back home on 26th Street. So Milestone's house was in Beverly Hills. So Brecht and I get in my car and I drive home, and he says, "You know, that man is not an artist. He's a heavyweight prize fighter." I thought that was the critical summing up of our work. Now, in the course of our putting Brecht on Arch of Triumph, I had suggested to Milestone, who was very much wanted to have a picture ready immediately for Bergman, so that as soon as we finished Arch of Triumph, he'd say to Ingrid, "Look, I have an original by Brecht." So we put him off. And Brecht said, "Yes, I have an idea that she can do." And as I sit here talking to you, I wonder where it is, because he did write it. Well, he had the idea. He was fascinated by attractive 40-year-old women who sat at bars alone in Hollywood. What were they doing there? These were not bimbos. These were women presence, well-dressed and so forth, but they were in these places drinking alone. And so he had an idea of a story called The Grey Goose. And he had an opening shot, which was based, there was a fire then, a tragic fire in Atlanta, I think it was. And Life magazine had a shot of a woman jumping out of a window, carrying a pair of shoes. And his opening shot was on these shoes. And you panned, you dollied alone, and there she is lying there dead. And the story goes back to how did she get there? Why did she jump out carrying a pair of shoes? And what were the circumstances where she found herself in that hotel room alone? So he had this idea. So we paid him, we made a deal with him. He was to get $250 a week. He asked if he could have, I want to say Hilda Baldo, who is, of course, Leon's secretary and colleague, actually. But actually, the woman who worked for Brecht was, oh God, she had one more eye. Was it Ruth?
Helene Weide?
Who?
Or Ruth Berlau?
Yeah, exactly. And he wanted her put on, we put her on at $70 a week. He said, because you know, my English is not good and she will translate as we go along. So we said, okay. Well, 6 months go by. And Milestone turns to me and he says, say, isn't it about time we heard from Brecht? And I say, yeah, here goes my job. He said, well, let's find out. We haven't read anything. We don't know, not a word had come in. So I called Brecht. And he says, oh, yes. You give me 1 week, Ruth has to get it in order. I said, okay. I go back, tell this to Milestone. She said, okay. So finally, at the end of a week, I called Brecht again, and he said, yeah, we have something. He brings it in. 6 months, 12 pages. So I give it to Milestone. He takes it. Well, he read it alone. And then I think it's about time that, yeah, he must have finished it. I find him just having finished a massage where we were shooting at that time. The Red Pony, I think. And he has come out of that area, he's all dressed, and there's a balcony. It's at the Republic Studios, which is now CBS on Radford, but actually that had been Republic, where we were making the Red Pony with Myrna Loy and Robert Mitchum. And he, not for Republic, we were using the lot, and he came out on this balcony. And I am down below, and I spot him. I said, Millie, hey, did you read the stuff? Well, you may think Romeo and Juliet's the great balcony scene. He took off about Brecht, screaming and yelling at the balcony. Meanwhile, I'd read it. I thought it was great. But shall we say, just an outline. What Billy had wanted was a first draft of this story. What Brecht had was what was going to happen. In the 12 pages, there were like out where the story went. Did I drop out of the shot?
No, you're fine.
Because if I did, we're going back. So I read it, and I thought what Brecht laid out was a fascinating story about this woman. The basis of which was the reason it's really about a woman who could never have a romance. She had men all through the story, but what really destroyed every relationship was her madness for money. She wanted this financial security all the way through. And she became a whiz in the course of it, a real estate whiz. And she made terrific money at real estate. And each course, as it went along, the piece, a man would enter her life in some way or another, and it would break up because she could never give him this direct thing. And at the end of the story, she finally is able to, with some guy. And then he asked for some money to do something, and it broke it up. I don't know what's happened to that story. I wonder if the daughter, Brecht's daughter or son, still have it, or found it. I wonder if it's amongst Milestone's papers, which could be at the Academy. I always thought that one could get hold of this thing, you see. So that was the end of that property, and the end of the relationship with Brecht. Although years later, when I moved back to New York in 1951 or 2, Leon gave me the rights to Simone as a play that he had collaborated on with Brecht. And he contacted Brecht, who was already back in Germany, for permission to give me the rights. And Brecht said yes. And so I had the rights to this play and no interest. Eventually it was done down at La Jolla as the first production of a new regime that had come in there. And it was directed by Peter Sellers. And in the course, you remember it? And in the course of it, Peter Sellers worked out staging. I know Peter and I like him very much, but some of the staging gets a little extreme, shall we say. He had a grid built out over the audience, and the actors were walking all over the place, and you had to look up at the grid and saw their feet and all that kind of thing. Martha was there. So I asked Martha, I said, how did you like it? She said, well, I'm afraid the young man didn't quite understand the play. It's the nicest thing I've ever heard somebody say about something. But she was a doll. We love Martha. She was really great.
Before we go to the Feuchtwangers, may I just go back to Bertolt Brecht as a person, because you said you drove him. So you drove him home after.
Oh, when he said that man is a heavyweight prize fighter.
Yeah, I would just be interested in how you think, what kind of person he was, like when you talked, how you think Brecht, what your impression of Brecht was, what kind of guy was he?
What kind of guy he was? He was very calculating about what he said, very careful about what he said. Although occasionally he would have an exchange with Hans, let's say, in which they would be terribly amused and laugh. But in the main, very careful. Careful is the word. Because his English, I had a feeling he understood more than he let on. You know, that's a good trick. But so he was very careful in speaking. Now, you had a feeling that there was always a kind of smile about him, as if he had a secret, which was that the world is ridiculous, you know, in his eye. And one goes on. With Helly, his wife, who was a wonderful woman, and could well have been, if you wanted to say so, the finest actress in the world at her time. She was, he wrote Mother Courage for her, as you know. And by the way, I must tell you, I was the first person he ever gave Mother Courage to, in English. He told me I could get a translation of it. There used to be a publication called New Directions, done by a fellow named James Laughlin. It was very avant-garde, and they would get out volumes periodically. And it was the avant-garde publication in this country. And they published a translation of Mother Courage by Hoffman Hayes, who was a poet out here who had obtained the rights to translate it. And Brett said to me, because there was a theater called the Actors Lab out here, and Brett said to me, I asked him if there was something he'd like to see done there. And this was before the whole Galileo thing came up. And Brett said, well, there is this play, Mother Courage, and you can read this translation. I still have the copy. And I immediately wanted to do it. And I brought it to the Actors Lab, which considered itself an avant-garde theater that would do anything. And they turned it down with the words, I still hear the words of the woman who was the head of the committee. It makes you want to cut your throat. That was my attempt to get it done. So, you asking about him, so he always had first of all, he looked like almost a cliche idea of the refugee, or a man about to be in a prison camp of refugees. The haircut, the denims, he was ahead of his time. but actually he looked like a fellow who was being carted off to a concentration camp. And he smoked cigars. You would have a dinner in his kitchen, but first we must refer to the bathrooms, which had wallpaper, all of which were Chinese newspapers in Chinese. You know, he loved Chinese theater, it's in his place. You'd go in there. Well, if this was meant for you to have something to read while you were in the job, it wasn't succeeding. But he had that.
And was it his?
What dear?
Was it his idea, or do you know?
I always attributed it to Brecht. I don't think Martha would have come up with that. Martha was meat and potatoes.
Helene. Helene. Helene.
Helene.
No problem.
Excuse me, Helly.
No problem.
We loved Helly. She was a great friend of my wife's. They hit it off because they're both sort of scandalous, I guess. But the thing is, Helly there was this round table. He drank, Brecht, Olympia beer. Mm-hmm. This was the one place Eisler was scornful of him, because Eisler could put away alcohol. He was never drunk. I never saw him drunk except when the frogs were copulating. But the thing is, Hans was scornful of Brecht's lack of alcoholic content. He would say, all he drinks is that beer. And it was Olympia beer at the time. It was a bottle, it was a small bottle. Mm-hmm. And Brecht would sit at the table, it was a round table, you'd sit like this. Mm-hmm. And on the wall was a beer opener, you know, the kind you screw in. So he'd take the bottle, and he'd put it in and take the top off. And then he'd put it on his plate. That was, but meat and potatoes, that was Helly. Mm-hmm. And of course, she did the costumes for Galileo. Mm-hmm. Because of her accent, mm-hmm. she could act in it. Mm-hmm. But eventually she did Mother Courage in Europe, which was one of the great performances of theatre history in Europe. Mm-hmm. But Helly was also responsible, and she was tiny, Helly, mm-hmm. very small. She had a voice like a bass drum. It went to the center of the earth. So that when she called me up, or when Brecht called me up, you've heard the story. You see, Charles was very nervous about going on the stage. You've heard the story?
I would love to hear it again.
Oh. You know the story of Charles. Well, Lawton was very nervous about doing a play after not having been in the theatre for 13 years. Been doing a lot of pictures, of course. And was a major, major star. But he was very nervous about returning to the theatre. And at rehearsals, the first scenes, Charles played first in a blouse and slacks, and he would wash himself, and then he would put on this great robe, which was known as the Leonardo robe. It was the robe modeled after a robe that Leonardo da Vinci wore. But previous to that, he would work just in the shirt and slacks, or without. And his nervousness resulted. You sure you want to hear this story?
Yeah.
His nervousness resulted, you're too young. You better leave the room. Resulted in his thrusting his left hand into his trousers pocket and, shall we say, fingering, if that's the word, his male organ. We used to watch this with wonder. This was rehearsal, but close to the opening. Mm-hmm. And we saw this 3-4 times. And he did it all the time until that robe got. We used to watch it with a great sense of suspense because we didn't know where all this was going. At that time, I, as I told you, was shooting the Red Pony during the day out in Agora in the heat. And I would come in after shooting, have a quick dinner. I lived up on Miller Drive then, and I'd go right down La Cienega, which is right there, to the theater. At this particular night, I'm having this quick dinner, the phone rings. I pick it up. Hello, Norma. Ah, yes, Brecht here. Yes, Brecht. I wish to speak to you about Charles playing with himself. I thought for a moment, this is a conversation for the history. It's like talking to Shakespeare about this. I mean, can you imagine what maybe Richard Burbage said to Shakespeare about a thing like this? I can't answer. Here I am talking to one of the leading playwrights in the world, a historical figure, about Charles playing with himself. I mean, all this flashed in a second through my mind, because I had a mind then. And I said, yes, Charles, yes, Brett. He said, well, you must talk to him and tell him to stop it. I said, in a moment of defense, Brett, I am not talking to Charles about his playing with himself. He said, well, you must. You have the theater. I said, you did the play with him. You work with him. He's closer to you than anybody. You're the only person he'll listen to. He said, I will not do it. I said, well, I'm not going to do it. Have Joe Lucy do it, I remember. He's directing the play. He should do it. He said, Joe said he will not do it. Well, I said, I am not going to do it, and we'll just have to go along. And he said, you will see. Where this came from, I don't know. You will see the sheriff will come and close your theater. He said to me. Where he got that from, I don't know.
Why were people so hesitant to talk? Why did nobody want to actually talk to Lawton? Was he so formidable a character?
Yeah. Particularly for the refugees to go up to Charles and say, you've got to stop this. Charles was an amazing character. I mean, extraordinary. So I said, well, it ended up in a stalemate with Brecht when suddenly he said, well, I told you, he said they would close our theater. Mm-hmm. When suddenly he said, it was clear I wasn't going to do it, and Joe wasn't going to do it, and he wasn't. Brecht wasn't doing it, because he was considering his collaboration with Lawton. He said, one moment, please, said Brecht. Helly will speak to you. She gets on the phone. Norman, this bass voice, this great, great voice. Oh. Yes, Helly. Do what Brett says. I said, Helly, I love you. I am not going to talk to Charles about this. It was she who said, you will see. She said it. They will come and close your theater. I said, well, it's a risk we have to take. End of conversation. The next day, at rehearsal, the little girl, or I should say, young girl, maybe about 19 or 20, who was assisting Helly with the costumes, was seen running across the stage with Charles galumphing after her. Who sewed up the pockets of my trousers? Who come here, you? Well, she got cornered. She couldn't get away, and he got her. He said, now you get a razor and undo these seams that have been put in these pockets. And she had to. That was, we don't know, we cannot say it was definitively, but if you wanted me to make a bet, Helly, Ellie had a needle and thread, and she was around the costumes. She decided, you can see her in conference with Brecht. What are we going to do? Brecht must have said, we sew up his trousers pockets. So that was an adventure.
Did Lawton finally stop playing?
Never.
No.
I suggested when we lost the battle, I said, let's advertise it. It'll bring in more business. I said, we'd bring in the younger people. But no one went along with me. We didn't need to, fortunately. The play was a sellout. The opening night was the most distinguished audience Hollywood ever had or saw. You had such major stars there. And
How many people did
the theater seated 264 people at that time. I don't know, they eventually changed the confirmation, but at that time, and it was just been built.
Do you have any photographs or programs or materials about Galileo? Because I was called several months ago, I was called by someone who was planning an exhibition on the play, and he asked me if we have photographs in our archive, and we don't have so much material about Galileo, so I was wondering if you...
There are stills of Brecht, of
Lawton.
Excuse me, there are stills of Lawton, particularly with the Galileo's disciples around him and all that. They should be somewhere.
Would be
It is not in my book. There isn't one in my book.
Maybe there's one in the book. We can look it up later.
Yeah. But I see the stills in my mind.
Yeah. But you didn't take
Now,
any
I'll tell you a very
private-
interesting thing also about Lawton and this thing. The coronet was small, and it had just one dressing room. And maybe they erected a kind of petition for Frances Heflin, the woman. But it was too small for Lawton. So he rented a trailer, which he parked outside the back of the theater. And the opening night, I said to John Osman, I think I'll go in and sit with Charles before the show, and because he was very nervous. And I went in to the trailer with him, and he was lying there in his first scene costume, drinking from a quart bottle of carbonated water and burping. And he was very nervous. And he was lying there drinking. He said, well, I'm glad I'm doing this. At the same time that we did Galileo, Laurence Olivier had the great company in the world, the Old Vic Company, with himself, Vivian Leigh, Maggie Leighton, Joyce Redmond, Ralph Richardson. I mean, the cream of the English theater. Every star practically was in his company, and they were touring the world. And Charles and Lawton said to me, you know, I think what Larry is doing is wonderful. He said, I think it is the greatest thing for the theater. But you know, I think doing this play is just as important. That was so moving. Because Elsa was telling him he was going to go to jail for doing a red play. And he said, no, this play is as important as Olivier's tour of the world with all these other plays. Olivier was doing Skin of Our Teeth, Romeo and Juliet, I think. He was doing that great production of, where is he blinded? Oedipus, I believe. And he had 3 plays in repertory. And the acclaim was fantastic in the world. And here was Charles in this 266th theater. And he thought doing this play was just as important. And you know something? He was right. Because the play today, as of today, is considered such an addition to the literature of the theater. And theater companies just are memories. They're gone. So Charles was right and justified. In this group of people, of course, was Schoenberg. Hans Eisler was a pupil of Schoenberg's. Schoenberg had 3 great students, Hans, Weber, and Berg. Schoenberg, who had a kind of marvelous charm, he was like some kind of bird, he was wonderful. But he had ideas, and he would relate them. And sometimes I would sit there, and my eyes would sort of pop open, like things he said. And once Hans leaned over to me and said, "He thinks he's king of the Jews." But this was Hans, who was a student, who addressed Schoenberg as Mr. Schoenberg, and Schoenberg addressed him as Mr. Eisler. This was 35 years after Hans had been a pupil, student. And at one point, when Schoenberg was here, one of his children, either Larry or Ronnie, I don't know which, needed a tonsillectomy. And this was in the days before Schoenberg had been popularized, so to speak, and began being part of the whole concert world in a commercial way. He'd already had the acclaim of his genius, but the actual number of concerts was still to come, so to speak. So he needed money. The boy's operation was going to cost $250. Hans had been doing well in the movies. He'd done 2 or 3 pictures. And so he had a little money. And he said to Schoenberg, "Mr. Schoenberg, if you need $250, I'll be very happy to lend it to you. But look, if you can't pay it back, don't worry about it. I'll take it in lessons." And Schoenberg said, "What? After 35 years, you still don't know my method? Out of my house! Threw him out." He threw Hans out. I mean, how can you not love these people? I mean, it's so beautiful. And of course, Hans was back in a day or 2, all forgotten. Yeah, you know.
Did you ever talk with Hans Eisler, or were you in contact with him when the hearings appeared of the House Committee of
Did you ever talk to him? What, dear?
When Hans Eisler's hearings.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't, because Hans. What happened? I mean, just the logistics of it. When Hans was summoned before the committee, that was in Washington, D.C., I don't think he was living here any longer, was he? Because didn't he go right from the hearings back to Germany?
Yeah, almost, yeah.
So he had disposed of everything out here. what did he have? You know, he was renting the cottage, and he had clothes. The furniture belonged, I think, to the cottage. So he was not living in the cottage. I remember I talked to him once on the phone, and it must have been he was in New York. And it was just how are you, or one of those things. But if memory serves, if I'm correct, at the end of the hearing, he immediately left, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
I think so.
I know that Brecht immediately after the hearing. Do you know if
I think that's right.
Well, Brecht
That's right.
apparently walked right from the hearing onto a plane.
Yeah, he already made arrangements.
Yeah.
Brecht knew
Oh.
whatever. Yeah.
That's what I mean about him. You had a sense about Brecht that he was contained, but oh boy, did he know. You know.
How was Brecht's English? Was it?
Well, when he got on the phone about Charles's playing with himself, it was the way I related to you. Norman, I wish to speak to you about Charles playing with himself. So I understood, but for the most part, he could make himself understood.
Okay.
It was heavily accented, but not guttural. It had a kind of neat, forward sound to it, you know. Hans had a more guttural thing. You want to hear Hans's favorite story?
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. You'll appreciate Hans. I knew way back, before I came out here, it must have been in the 30s, a minor poet in New York named Alfred Kreynborg, minor poet. He, in order to earn a living, because he couldn't get it out of poetry, he spoke German very fluently. And so he used to work at doing translations. So Alfred Kreynborg was working with a biologist who had written a book in German. And they were translating it from German into English. When this German professor said to Alfred Kreynborg one day while they were working, and he had a heavily accented speech, he said, "Your English language, it's not good. It doesn't have the right sound. Say, look, like a poem. Hark, hark, the lark. It's so ugly. Hark, hark, the lark. But in German, higher, higher, the lark. So beautiful." Hans Eisler used to fall out of his chair, and at any opportunity he got, he said, "Tell that story." He loved that story. It would knock him out. So I got to roll the R's more each time, because Hans would go, oh, no, his legs would go up, he was very short. Oh, that was his, he didn't get a German movie, he said, "Tell him that story." So that was Hans's humor. He had wonderful humor. People would come and drink too much and then leave, and I'd say, you know, he didn't behave too well. He said, he was an amiable alcoholic. Oh, Hans was beautiful, but nothing ever topped "Nature is boring." Looking out at the ocean. A story that I should tell you about this house and Leon and Thomas Mann. This is not a member of the Screen Actors Guild. I always gave this story a title called The Santa Monica Outlook.
Mhm.
There used to be in this town a newspaper in Santa Monica called the Santa Monica Outlook. And it so happens that Leon would subscribe to it, have it thrown on his doorstep. No, I'm wrong. It was published in Santa Monica, the Outlook. Leon subscribed to the Times, which was thrown on his doorstep, as did Thomas Mann. And one morning, Leon went out to get his newspaper, and there on the sidewalk was a swastika.
Like
Well,
painted?
Painted on the sidewalk. Well, for a man who had fled as he had and had this terrible experience in the concentration camp and all that, this was a matter of great moment to be dealt with. First person he thought of was Thomas Mann, as his friend. So he came in and he called Thomas Mann, and Thomas Mann said, "I was about to call you because there was a swastika also on my sidewalk." They discussed what they should do. And they came to a common conclusion. They should call the police, which one of them did. Whoever called, including the other in the conversation. In the police station at the time, there happened to be a reporter from the newspaper of Santa Monica called the Santa Monica Outlook. And he became aware of what they had called in about. How he did that, but he did know they had called in about the swastikas. So the Santa Monica Outlook, which is what I call this story, was published the next day as follows. Thomas Mann and Lion Feuchtwanger, comma, local authors, comma, found on their sidewalks, etc. But calling them local authors, I thought that was the Santa Monica Outlook.
Did you ever follow up about the swastika? What?
No, I had no occasion to. This was a story that Leon told me.
Okay.
He loved the local authors. I mean, it so appealed to their humor about things, you see.
Yeah.
Now, oh yes. One night Hans, you asked about Hans's parties. Well, the people were there, and Mann. But one night he gave a dinner party. It may have been, I suspected it was, although it may not have been, but the first meeting of Chaplin and Thomas Mann. And Hans and Lou gave a dinner party of which there were only 8 people. Hans and Lou, Thomas Mann and his wife, Chaplin and Una, and my wife and myself. That was a dinner party to be remembered. in the course of which we had just had our second child, whom I had named, or not I, but we. My wife ever saw this and said, I named this child, you'd be off the air. We named the child Adam Michael Lloyd. And so we were talking, Charlie was very interested in all this. We told him we just had this baby, and Una and my wife were good friends. So we were talking about this. We were at the table. And Charlie said, you know, the rhythm's wrong of that name. Adam Michael, it should be Michael Adam. Better rhythm, Michael Adam than Adam Michael. So from then on we called the boy. We'd already signed the birth certificate Adam Michael, but he was always known as Michael Adam, and he's always known as Mike. Never uses the name Adam. Charlie did that at that dinner party. So you see, whenever I talk to my boy Mike, who's now 61 years old, I have occasion sometimes to think of Charlie.
That's nice.
Move the name around. But Martin was at that dinner, quite silent, didn't talk very much, loved his cigars, of course. And as you know, he told Leon not to come back. You know about all that. So
maybe why don't we go over to Leon and Martha? And
go what, dear?
Why don't we go over to Leon and Martha? And
Okay, that'd be lovely.
Yeah. So how do you remember how you met them first, or where, on what occasion you were introduced to each other?
It would be definitely through Hans. And so it must have been in the little cottage on the beach that we met Leon and Martha. It could be no other way. It just worked out wonderfully. We loved them both. And so we were not actually socially engaged with them. I used to come here alone and talk with Leon about the book, and then he had a play called The Devil in Boston, which he wanted me to do at the Coronet. And we talked about that. I actually got a very prominent scene designer, Harry Horner, to do the set, and he did a wonderful model of it. The play was eventually done, as you probably know, but not by me. I was long gone from this town. And he, but socially, at the gatherings he used to have here, my wife and I did not attend them. But we would see Martha and Leon at the at Hans's, and sometimes at Sauka's. Sauka used to have them all the time, and she had a great mix, Sauka, of Hollywood people with them. I never saw Garbo there, but Garbo, once I saw Garbo there. But she had the Henrys, of course. Peter Lorre used to come to Hans's. And some of the other names you're interested in, perhaps I would remember.
Yeah, we can later on. I just want to see what you remember.
Leon and Martha.
Leon and Martha. Yeah, and also I have a list of people we can go through, but maybe later.
Well, Leon and Martha, they, we'd see them, as I say.
And what was your impression of both Leon and Martha?
Well,
like
you know, when you say impression, it's the thing I mentioned before about Brecht. these people who had seen such a terrible time had such humor. That's what I remember about these people. Leon had a kind of permanent twinkle in his eyes, you know, he was marvelous. And they observed the world as if it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, what's happened is ridiculous. So, while they were very serious about what they did, and Leon, you know, finally got back his third library, and he was being published and all that, but it wasn't like being in your native country. Once you are out, it's never the same. One could appreciate that. And the sad thing in the Hunt story, did you ever see that documentary that they made, that company in Toronto? It's the greatest documentary made about an artist in our time. It's about Hunts. But what you get at the end is heartbreak. And you not only get heartbreak, you get silence. He says that. He says, why should I not be silent? So the layer over it was a kind of humor which leavened the unhappiness that was in these people. Now it is true that Brecht went back, Willem Helle, and triumphed with their Berliner ensemble. But then he ran into all that trouble, Brecht, back in his country. And Hans ran into trouble back in the country. So suddenly they were in trouble in their native land. So their lives had been rearranged, so to speak, dismantled. Although through it all you have these wonderful personalities, these strong people, these fantastic, creative artists. That's what kept them alive, their creativity. But what they suffered is people being pushed around. So I never was here with the group. My impression was that Leon used to have them mostly in German. I don't know. But at Hans's, you had in English. Martha was an extraordinary looking person. I remember it was at her 90th birthday. Leon was gone by that time. And she was reaching in her pocket and eating something. I said, Martha, give me some. She said, it's salami. I said, no, thank you.
Must be something about Germans and salami.
They're all eating salami. I didn't say, considering what it did to your husband. She would have said, he drank sherry with it, probably. But what she said to me, I said, but Martha, at your age eating that, you know, we were all on this health thing. I said, Martha, at your age eating that isn't very good. She said, why not? I love it. And that's it. A great attitude.
Did you see her after Leon's death? You were friends, I think, you and your wife and Martha?
We used to see her on occasion. She'd come to our house a couple of times. At the end, we lost touch with her because we went back to New York. And she stayed here. I think did she die in this house?
She died in the hospital.
She died where, dear?
In the hospital, as
in the
far as
hospital,
I know.
yes.
I don't know where she, but I think in the hospital. She was over the last 2 or 3 years of her life, she was in hospital on and off and on and off, so.
She was about 92 when she died?
I think even older.
Well, I know I was at her 90th birthday,
Yeah.
so she had lived a couple of years
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, she did. And I know we have correspondence between you and your wife and Martha from 67 until 85. So you were in close contact with her.
Yes, she did invite us. This I've got to tell you. She did invite us to the dedication of the library, the Feuchtwanger Library down at SC.
Mm-hmm.
And there I find myself standing amidst a group of people, none of whom was Martha in this group,
Mm-hmm.
but all of whom were German academics.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that I had played Shakespeare. So they got into a discussion with me. They were leading up to a point, to make a point,
Mm-hmm.
which was, as one of them said to me, you really have not heard Shakespeare at his richest until you have heard the Schlegel version. I said, what? Until you have heard Schlegel's Shakespeare, that is the culmination, the acme. So there then flashed into my mind a Dorothy Parker saying, which she experienced this also with a German actor. And she said, when the actor had said to her, you haven't heard Shakespeare till you've heard the German of Schlegel. She said, Dorothy Parker said, you must admit the English translation is pretty good. So I said, you must admit the English translation is pretty good. And do you know what this guy said to me? Not bad. Now that is a true story. And that is the dedication of the Lion Feuchtwanger Library. Oh, I have lived through some very difficult times.
All those Germans.
Oh, you know, when he said not bad, I had no reply. I mean,
There was something else I wanted to ask you.
no, I would ask you more about Martha, except she was just wonderful to be with. I mean, I haven't stories, and I told you, I Trot is the great story.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did she talk about when Leon just died?
I was at the ceremony. Well, it was the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
They then took him from the ceremony and cremated him.
Can you tell us a little bit about the funeral?
I can't remember. I remember they played a Haydn quartet.
Mm-hmm. And this was at the cemetery, or where?
Yeah, it was not here.
It was not here. And do you know who was there? Who were the guests? Or are there many people? Or
Well, there were quite a few. It wasn't big,
Mm.
but there may have been 100 or so.
Mhm.
It seemed to me, what I seem to remember is they took him right from there to cremate him. Where are his ashes? Does anyone
He's
know?
on, is it Woodlawn? In Santa Monica. I think it's Woodlawn Cemetery.
Is she with him there?
Yeah.
Ashes too cremated, yes. Well,
I think he is cremated.
well, wherever this happened at the cemetery, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was a Haydn string quartet.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember how Martha
Yes, I remember her crying.
was? She was very...
Oh, I remember
sad,
her
or
crying, tears.
Mm.
I thought, this is wonderful. This marvelous woman, gymnast, in the ocean, all of that, strong what she'd been through. And what Leon went. it got right to her heart.
Mm-hmm. Did Martha ever talk to you about her relationship with Leon or other women? Something? No.
No, we knew that Leon was a pussycat, which he would use as his approach. My wife and I were always amused about that. There goes Leon. but that was all right. I mean, look, I'm not doing him injustice. It's no secret. He was flirtatious, which amused us. It was really great, and we never saw Martha's reaction to all that. She probably just waved it away. I mean,
He was a fairly unprepossessing looking fellow.
is she what?
He was a fairly unprepossessing looking fellow, I would think.
Well, you could put it that way, yes. He was short. He had thick glasses. He had a wonderful smile. And behind those thick glasses, a lot was going on all the time. So, yeah. And he had this great secretary, Hilda Balder, was it?
Mm-hmm.
She was a great character. Yeah, she was marvelous, marvelous.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that she was not in good health. I don't know why. Her walk seemed slow and so on. I could be wrong about that, but she didn't seem to. Well, she died after Martha, didn't she?
Yeah, she went to USC and worked for USC for
That's
a
right,
while.
yeah.
I think for the School of Architecture or something. I don't remember.
I remember when that happened, yes, and that was the last I saw of her.
Yeah.
She lived somewhere on Sunset
Does that
in Pacific Palisades, I believe, and we never could find her. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where she lived, or
Yeah.
we don't know much about her. But yeah, we have pictures of her, and we even have a colleague at USC who
she was, excuse me, an integral part of.
Was she here when you were working with Leon on Simon? Was she here as well? Or was it just the two of you?
I didn't work with him on Simon here.
Okay.
I was in New York. He gave me the rights to the dramatization.
Oh, okay.
It was done at La Jolla, but I had nothing to do with that production.
Okay.
You worked with him on The Devil in Boston, you said?
The Devil in Boston, and he wanted me to do it, and we lost the theater. I say John Houseman and I. We lost the theater, and eventually a production was done. I don't know if it was done at the Coronet. It was done at some theater out here.
Yeah, we have something over there that may even say where.
I wonder if they used Harry Horner's design. Harry Horner was a very prominent.
Yeah.
Actually, he had come over here with Max Reinhardt.
We have some sketches or some drawings of the set in our library.
That would be Harry Horner.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to double check. Does it say where it was?
It was at the Circle Theater,
The Circle did it.
yes, on El Centro Avenue.
Right. I wonder if they used Harry Horner's sets. They might have been too big.
A fellow named George Boroff was.
He produced it. That's right. I knew him. But does it say who did the sets?
No.
And we have to double check. We have the drawings in the library.
The sets were quite realistic. If they were the sets, what you have is Harry Horner. Harry Horner had won an Academy Award, and he was a major production designer in this town. Reinhardt had brought him over way back in 1935 when Reinhardt came over to do The Eternal Road in New York.
His name was Harry Horner?
Harry Horner.
And he's German as well?
He was German.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Interesting. I would like to ask you something, maybe a little bit more about the Salka Viertel.
About whom?
The Salka Viertel.
Salka. Salka Bertel. She was a striking-looking woman, very dramatic. She was actually Polish and had been a very highly thought-of actress in Poland. But she came to this country, and of course the language thing. She was married to Bertold Bertel, who's a leading German director. But when I got to know them, she had the house in Santa Monica, which was the salon in this town.
Well, there were Marbury Road.
Maybury.
That's right. There were two, I won't say rival, but there were two different factions, I guess. There was Salka with Brecht and Hans and Thomas Mann and Heinrich Mann and Schoenberg very much. Salka's brother, Steuermann, who's the leading pianist exponent of Schoenberg's work. And at Salka's there were Chaplin, Lawton, who would also be at Hans's. So they were interchangeable, those two. The other faction was in Beverly Hills. It was Alma Mahler.
Did you know her as well?
No. I knew her daughter. But Alma Mahler, there would be Otto Klemperer, Bruno Walter, Franz Werfel, her husband. They were that faction. But this faction was in Santa Monica. Salka used to make lentil soup on Sunday nights with pumpernickel. And that would be, you'd come in and you'd have that. And she established herself in this town as one of the writers for Garbo. And was a very close and a great friend of Garbo's. Her husband, Bertold, it didn't work out, whatever it was, and he went back to Germany. There's a book about him by Christopher Isherwood, who lived in the back, in the garage, over the garage at that time, before he struck it.
In their house?
Not in, well, the garage of their house.
Okay.
You had to go out of their house to the garage, and he lived upstairs over the garage. Just before he struck it rich with I Am a Camera, and it became Cabaret, the musical. And then it's gone on forever, it's still running. So, but he was there, and this was a salon. I mean, yeah, that was it.
How often did they?
She had a kind of open house every Sunday.
Oh, okay.
And you didn't just drop in. That was something else. But she would invite people.
Okay.
And I got to know her. We got to know her a little better because she had a grandchild, Vicky, who was Peter Wertel's daughter by his first wife, who was, well, Jaiji. Jaiji was a femme fatale. She was very beautiful, had very red cheek. You thought it was rouge. It wasn't. It was just red cheeks. And she and Peter broke up. And Salka was very much into the raising of Vicky. Ah, I've got it. Vicky, why do I think Bud Schuberg was her father? Anyway, Peter gave the child a name, Vicky Bertel.
Mm-hmm.
He married, that was it, I think.
Okay.
He married Jaji,
Yeah.
and they raised this child whose father had been Bud Schulberg. I hope I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
And Salka was very, very good about that. Yeah, I have pictures which I can never find of Salka and Vicky with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So
But to the gatherings at the Viertel house, you went.
I would go to
You
Salka's.
would go there.
Yeah.
And what happened? Were people just having lentil soup and?
Well, they'd have the lentil soup,
chatting?
but mostly they sat around talking.
Okay.
These were people who talked to each other.
Okay. So there was no program or music.
Never,
or
never.
they-
Like at Hans's, which was a small cottage,
Mhm.
just people sat to see each other and talk.
Mhm.
Was there any music going on, piano? Or,
No.
No?
None.
And was there something? It's funny. Martha Feuchtwanger, in her oral history, when she is asked about the Viertel meetings, she's like, she doesn't talk. Was there something special going on? Something you wouldn't talk about? Because she's like,
She wouldn't talk about it.
she wouldn't talk about it.
Maybe it was just rivalry.
Oh, okay.
But you know, they were interesting. I remember listening to the radio with Schoenberg, Stokowski with the Philadelphia Orchestra was playing the music from Parsifal. And Schoenberg is sitting there. Now Stokowski has just given him $1,000 just to help him. And he's listening. He turns and he just says to the world in general, listening to the music, not bad for Stokowski. They talked. But you see, there was about them a kind of snobism.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest compliment I ever received from Hans as an actor was, he said, "You are a modern actor." That's the biggest compliment I ever got. But that's the biggest compliment he ever gave. I was modern. I took it as a great thing.
Do you remember any other meetings or stories about Heinrich Mann? Did you get to know Heinrich Mann? Heinrich Mann? The brother of Thomas Mann?
Oh, Heinrich Mann.
Heinrich Mann.
No, I never got to know him.
Okay.
And you know, interesting enough, I never met him. The times I was there that Mann was there, he was not there at either place.
Did you get to know the Hollywood exile community as well, the people like Dieterle or the Siodmaks or any of the other?
Dieterle I never knew.
Uh-huh.
All I knew is he had a wife who would not, and he wore white gloves when he directed. And the wife would sit back there and nod yes or no after a take, which was also true of Paul Muni's wife. Yes or no. Which was also true of Monty Clift, who had a woman named Mira or something. And it was only when she said yes. And my darling, dear Hitchcock, when Monty Clift was doing this picture that I Confess with Hitchcock, there was Mira on the set, on a Hitchcock set, going, no. And Hitch knew it. So my friend Carl Malden, who was in the picture, said to Hitch one day, "Do you know what's going on? Do you permit it?" It just means every time she does that, he has one less close-up. As a cameraman, you would appreciate that. So no, I didn't know Dieterle. Who else?
Siodmak, you know,
Robert.
Robert, yeah.
I met him a couple of times. He was wonderful. And by the way, tremendous director. Not really recognized as he should be, as one of the very best.
Yeah. As far as
And I met him, as a matter of fact, I met him, he was doing a picture and my friend Richard Conte was in it. And I went to visit Conte on the set. And Siodmak was saying, this part, I like a woman who, we were sitting in Conte's dressing room, and he described a woman. I said, Shelley Winters, whom I knew. And so he put Shelley in the part. And she was wonderful in that picture, whatever it was. No, he was terrific. Yes, and I enjoyed meeting him. I have met Kurt Siodmak, who lives, he died, didn't he? But he was in his 90s when I met him. I didn't know him in that period. But Robert, I remember where he lived, and he was charming, lovely, vital person. But I never had any creative experience with him. Who else?
I have a question. I know that in New York you worked with Joseph Schildkraut.
Who, with whom?
Joseph Schildkraut. How do you?
Oh, Joseph Schildkraut.
yeah.
And he also.
Pepe! Oh! Well, how much more film have you got? Pepe, there was a character. I first met him. I'll have to leave at 1:30.
Okay, how are we doing?
We're good.
Oh, yeah. How much?
40 minutes on that too.
No, what time is it now?
It's 1:20.
1:20. We can have another meeting some other time if you want to.
Because I have two short questions about Chaplin as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just in passing about Pepe, because we need a studio about Pepe. Pepe, I first met when I was an apprentice, age 17, with Villa Aurora. He had come from Europe, but he wasn't a refugee. He had come to America, where he had been before. He had become a star in 1922, it was, or somewhere there, with Lilium, with Le Gallienne. And when she reopened her theater after having suffered terrible burns in a fire, in 1932, which is when I started there, she opened with Lilium, with Schildkraut. Most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It was so beautiful, the two of them. And I got to know Pepe. As a matter of fact, he said to Eva one day, the reason I know what he said is this. He said, I'd like a dresser. And Le Gallienne said, okay, so a young lady, he said. Do you have a young lady dresser? And she could make him cry. But he'd start to weep. Because he could turn on like a faucet. Didn't mean a damn thing, you see. And she said, now, Pepe, you behave yourself. He said, I just wanted a dresser. She said, well, maybe a couple of the boys will. So I heard about it with my friend Al Scorby, who was also an apprentice, and we volunteered at 50 cents a performance. So I had the first matinee. And I got fired. One performance, and Scorby never was even permitted to serve as a dresser. And the reason was that I, as a kid, you see, came into the star, the Pepe Schildkraut, and I began to see his costumes and the hats, and I began to try everything on. And he saw this. And then I committed the terrible sin of offering him his shoes with a shoehorn. And he was superstitious about the shoehorn. He said, I don't use that. But the hat and the jacket and so forth. So he said to Eva, he will not do. He then had to go out. I stole the hat, one of the hats. I wore it for years. I'd go out for jobs wearing Shawkraut's hat. So it was a marvelous hat. It was just great. And, oh yeah, that hat. But do you know he became a dear friend of mine? Warm. He came to visit us. I love Pepe. Not then he'd become a dear friend. It was in later years I met up with him. I've forgotten how, but he used to come to the house in New York and so forth.
Is this when he was doing Anne Frank?
Hmm?
Is this when he was performing in Anne Frank on Broadway?
And Frank,
Yeah.
and previous to that, Uncle Harry, I think. Yeah. Forgot how he used to come to our apartment at those days. Yeah. Now, your quick question about Chaplin.
Okay. And it's a filmmaker, and he wants to do a film about Charlie Chaplin as an exile. So his question is: did you think that Charlie Chaplin was completely adjusted to America? Did he come across to you as an American?
Charlie?
Mm-hmm.
No. He came across to me, first of all, he had an English accent.
Mm-hmm.
But above all, he came across to you as a citizen of the world of no country.
Mm-hmm.
But he himself remained English. English. Thus, in this beautiful home he had in Beverly Hills, with the most beautiful things, furniture, things in cabinets, beautiful dishes and sculpture, whatever. Every night in the winter, he had a fire in the fireplace. The butler would bring it in, a coke fire, not wood, what they used in England in the tenements. That terrible smoke, you know, the coke. That's what Charlie wanted, so he never forgot. And when he went back, he was caught in the middle of the ocean by this government saying you can't come back unless you pass this. He was going back to show his children where he was raised. They had never seen the part of London that he had come from. So he remained, something about him remained English. But as he pointed out, he raised millions for America during World War I on bond drives, particularly with Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford.
The other quick question he has is, did you feel that he enjoyed the company of Europeans, especially European immigrants and exiles?
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, he would have Hans and all the people I've mentioned, and Leon, and Charlie. Nehru would come to visit him, and a great mixture. But yes, Charlie. I can't say he was European, but he was European. But he was, you had never had a feeling about Charlie that he was of any country. This was a genius, and he was just something that had descended on the earth. And, you know, if he came in this room now to meet you, the way he would walk in, with the spirit and so on. And he had wonderful attitudes. I used to play tennis a lot with him. And one day he had a lead in a certain game. And he began to lose the lead in this game. And I heard him muttering to himself as he was going back to pick up a ball. And so I inched up to the net to hear what he was saying. What was he talking about? And he was saying, Charlie, he was talking to himself. Charlie, since he was losing this lead, you see, he said, Charlie, take all the success you can get. Great attitude. Charlie was wonderful on his attitudes about the world, about how you live. He was marvelous. And so I never felt about Charlie that he was, I'd see these English things I mentioned, like the Coke. And the butler was very English. And the butler, of course, looked, I'm going to tell you one more great story. The butler looked down on Charlie and Una. They didn't give the parties as exquisite as Lady Mendel, whom he served before, you see. And she was very social. But Charlie brought all these strange people in, like me, you see. And great people, you know. What was the great story I was going to tell you? Because another thing came to mind when we were talking about people. How one day he had this boat called the Panacea, which we were out on. But one day a guy rose up in a rowboat and says, "For you, Mr. Chaplin, a lot of lobsters and so on." It was Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, wow.
It was an honor for him to, you see. But, what was this great? Damn it.
I bet there are millions of great.
That's what happens. They're jarring against one another. I mean, it's just like a billiard balls hitting on the table. But it was such a great story. What did you ask me, the last thing you asked me?
If he enjoyed the company of European exiles or German exiles.
Well, he did, yes. He had them in his home. And you see the people who'd meet in his home. I remember when he ran Monsieur Verdoux. And we went to a special screening before it opened. And then he served this banquet in his home. And it was not at individual tables. There were tables you sat on like chairs at long tables, like the knights in armor would do, because Charlie had this banquet all built when he was a bachelor, that you'd have knights in armor, and he had a great organ there, which he would play at night, you see, madly. But this, no longer. Once he had Una, whom he said once to me as we were walking from tennis court, "I've never known what love is till I knew this woman." And once he had Una, he forgot the organ, but he had this big banquet after Verdoux. And I saw Brett sitting there. So I walked over to sit next to Brett, because there was a place open beside him. And I sit myself down, and next to me is Evelyn Waugh. The two, Brecht and Waugh, are disagreeing about Verdoux. Brecht loves it, Waugh dismisses it. He said it's like a story of Oscar Wilde's called Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, which I had done on the Hitchcock. So I sat down, but I didn't know that it was Waugh till after I sat. Now I'm in the middle. Did you ever sit at a tennis match and go, I was like out of tennis matches. These two guys were. And Brecht was wonderful. No, I think, no, I prefer, no, it's much better this way. Well, it was, of course, since Evelyn Waugh, of course, it's like it's Oscar Wilde. I mean, she would have, no, I think it's a little better. And there's me in the middle. It was a wonderful moment in my life. And Brecht made more sense. Now look, I've got to go, only because I've got to help my son buy a house.